I never expected that my grandmother's death would become the catalyst for the most transformative period of my life. My name is Elena Rossi, and this is the story of how a single dollar and a hidden inheritance changed everything I thought I knew about family, love, and my own worth. Growing up in the Rossi household meant learning early that some children are golden and others are simply overlooked. My brother Marcus was 3 years older than me, blessed with my mother Ruth's sharp green eyes and my father Thomas's broad shoulders. He commanded attention wherever he went, whether it was scoring the winning touchdown in high school or charming his way into his first job on Wall Street. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one who helped with homework, did the dishes without being asked, and somehow never quite measured up to the brilliance that seemed to radiate from Marcus effortlessly. My grandmother Isabella had always been different from the rest of my family. While my mother fussed over Marcus's every achievement and my father retreated into his newspaper and evening scotch, Nana would pull me aside during family gatherings. She would stroke my dark hair and tell me stories about her youth in Italy, about women who had to be strong when the world told them to be small. She had immigrated to America with nothing but a suitcase and a fierce determination to build something meaningful. By the time I was old enough to understand, she had amassed considerable wealth through shrewd investments and a small chain of bakeries that had become neighborhood institutions. The dynamics in our family had been crystal clear for as long as I could remember. Marcus was the heir apparent, the one who would carry on the family name and legacy. I was expected to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention came my way. When Marcus struggled in college, my parents hired the best tutors money could buy. When I graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern with a degree in finance, the celebration dinner lasted exactly 45 minutes before the conversation shifted to Marcus's latest promotion. I had learned to swallow my disappointment along with my pride, telling myself that family meant sacrifice and that love wasn't always fair. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. My grandmother had passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87. I was the only one who cried at the funeral, while Marcus and my mother discussed the logistics of inheritance taxes in hushed voices near the casket. My father stood stoically by the grave, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, his eyes holding secrets I couldn't decipher. 1 week after the funeral, we gathered in the mahogany-paneled office of Whitmore, Patterson and Associates for the reading of the will. The autumn light filtered through tall windows as Mr. Whitmore, my grandmother's longtime attorney, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and cleared his throat. My mother sat ramrod straight in her tailored black suit, her manicured fingers drumming impatiently on her Hermes purse. Marcus lounged in his chair with the casual confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. My father remained silent, studying his hands with unusual intensity. Mr. Whitmore's voice was steady and professional as he read through the legal terminology. The family home on Beacon Hill, worth over $3 million, went to Marcus. The investment portfolio, valued at nearly $2 million, also went to Marcus. The jewelry, the art collection, the remaining bakery that still turned a healthy profit, all of it flowed to my brother like water finding its natural course. And then came my name. To my beloved granddaughter Elena, Mr. Whitmore read, his voice somehow gentler, I leave the sum of $1, along with all my love and the knowledge that she has always understood what truly matters in life. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the blood drain from my face as the words sank in. $1. After 26 years of being the good granddaughter, the one who visited every Sunday, who listened to her stories and remembered her birthday, I was worth exactly $1 in her eyes. Marcus couldn't contain his smirk. Well, Elena, looks like you can buy yourself a candy bar, he said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. Maybe a pack of gum if you're feeling fancy. My mother's response was somehow worse than Marcus's cruelty. Elena, darling, you've always been so independent. Nana probably thought you didn't need anything. You should be grateful she acknowledged you at all. The dismissive way she said it, as if my hurt was unreasonable, as if I was being dramatic for expecting anything more than scraps, felt like a slap across the face. I sat there in that leather chair, surrounded by family who had just witnessed my complete and utter rejection, and felt something crack open inside my chest. It wasn't just the money, though the financial slight stung deeply. It was the message that my devotion meant nothing, that my place in this family was as insignificant as the crumpled dollar bill that Mr. Whitmore would eventually hand me. My father finally spoke, his voice quiet and measured. "Elena, walk with me to the car." It wasn't a request. As we made our way through the marble lobby, he stopped and turned to face me. His gray eyes, usually so guarded, held an emotion I couldn't quite name. "Your grandmother was a complicated woman," he said carefully. "Don't let today define how you see yourself. Or how you see her." I wanted to ask him what he meant, but Marcus and my mother were approaching, already deep in conversation about renovation plans for the Beacon Hill house. The ride home was excruciating. Marcus called his fiancée to share the good news while my mother planned a celebration dinner. I stared out the window at the Boston skyline and felt like a stranger in my own life. That evening, I sat alone in my small apartment in Cambridge, holding the crisp dollar bill and trying to make sense of what had happened. I had dedicated so much of my life to being the perfect granddaughter, the dutiful daughter, the supportive sister. I had sublimated my own needs and desires for the supposed good of family harmony. And this was my reward, public humiliation and a token so small it felt like a joke. I called in sick to work the next day, something I had never done without being genuinely ill. I spent hours walking along the Charles River, trying to process the overwhelming cocktail of hurt, anger, and confusion that churned in my stomach. My phone buzzed with messages from well-meaning friends who had heard about the will reading through Boston's tight-knit social circles. Each expression of sympathy felt like salt in an open wound. It was on Thursday evening that Mr. Whitmore called. "Elena, could you come to my office tomorrow afternoon? There's something we need to discuss privately." His tone was careful, almost secretive. I agreed, more out of curiosity than hope. I had no idea that this phone call would be the first step toward reclaiming my life. Friday afternoon found me back in that same mahogany-paneled office, but this time I was alone with Mr. Whitmore. He was a distinguished man in his 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes that had probably witnessed more family drama than any therapist. He gestured for me to sit, then walked to an old safe hidden behind a painting of the Boston Harbor. "Your grandmother asked me to give this to you exactly 1 week after the public reading of her will," he said, withdrawing a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. She was very specific about the timing. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was another will, written entirely in my grandmother's careful script, along with a letter addressed to me personally. The legal document was brief but stunning. Isabella Rossi left me a trust fund worth $8 million, currently held in a private bank in Switzerland, along with detailed instructions for a charitable foundation that had been operating in my name for the past 5 years. But it was the letter that brought tears to my eyes. "My dearest Elena," it began, "if you are reading this, then you have endured the pain I knew would come with my public will, and for that, I am truly sorry. But I needed your family to show you exactly who they are when they believe there is nothing left for you to inherit. I needed you to see the truth I have watched break your spirit for years." She went on to explain that she had been quietly observing our family dynamics, taking note of how I was consistently overlooked and undervalued. She had watched me sacrifice my own needs to keep peace, watched me shrink myself to avoid confrontation, watched me accept crumbs while Marcus feasted at the table of our parents' affection. "The money I have left you comes with a responsibility," the letter continued. "For the past 5 years, I have been using my resources to help women who, like you, have been told they are worth less than they are. The Elena Rossi Foundation provides financial assistance, business loans, and educational grants to women seeking to rebuild their lives. Mr. Henri Moreau in Geneva will explain everything. This is your chance to discover who you really are when you are not trying to earn love that should be freely given." The letter ended with words that would stay with me forever. "You were never the problem, my darling girl. You were just surrounded by people who couldn't see your light." Mr. Whitmore watched me process this information with the patience of someone who had helped my grandmother orchestrate this elaborate revelation. "She spent months planning this," he said gently. She wanted to make sure you understood that your worth was never tied to their recognition of it. The next few weeks passed in a blur of international phone calls, legal documents, and careful planning. I took a leave of absence from my job at the small investment firm where I had been consistently passed over for promotions despite outperforming my male colleagues. I told my family I was taking some time to travel and process my grief, which wasn't entirely untrue. The flight to Geneva was my first trip to Europe, something I had always dreamed of but never prioritized while I was busy putting everyone else's needs first. As the plane lifted off from Logan Airport, I felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. For the first time in my adult life, I was doing something entirely for myself. Henri Moreau met me at the airport, a distinguished man in his 50s with warm brown eyes and an immediate sense of trustworthiness. During the drive to his office, he told me about his friendship with my grandmother and his admiration for her vision. Isabella was one of the sharpest minds I have ever encountered, he said. She built something beautiful with her resources, and she chose you to continue that legacy. The Elena Rossi Foundation was housed in an elegant building overlooking Lake Geneva. Henri led me through offices where dedicated staff members worked on cases involving women from around the world. There were files documenting success stories, a single mother in Detroit who had received a business loan to start a catering company, a woman in rural Kentucky who had gotten educational funding to become a nurse practitioner, a group of women in Chicago who had received grants to open a cooperative childcare center. This is what your grandmother built in your name, Henri explained as we toured the facilities. And now it is truly yours to guide. I spent 2 weeks in Geneva, learning about the foundation's operations and meeting some of the women we had helped. Each story reinforced something I was beginning to understand about my own life, that I had been living as if I needed permission to take up space in the world, as if my dreams and ambitions were somehow less important than maintaining the status quo that kept everyone else comfortable. One afternoon, as I sat in a cafe overlooking the lake, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to return to Boston as the same Elena who had left. I wasn't going to slip back into the role of the accommodating daughter who absorbed emotional blows with a smile. I was going to build something meaningful with the resources my grandmother had entrusted to me, and I was going to stop apologizing for my own existence. When I returned to Boston 3 weeks later, I rented office space in the financial district and began establishing the American operations of the Elena Rossi Foundation. I hired a small but passionate staff and began the careful work of identifying women who needed the kind of support that could change the trajectory of their lives. One of our first clients was Lorraine, a 42-year-old woman who had spent 15 years in an abusive marriage before finally finding the courage to leave with her 2 young children. She had a business degree but no work experience and no credit history in her own name. The foundation provided her with temporary housing assistance, childcare support, and seed money to start a small accounting practice. Watching her confidence grow as she built something of her own reminded me daily of why this work mattered. Then there was Camille, a 28-year-old immigrant from Haiti who had been working 3 minimum wage jobs to support her family while putting herself through nursing school. The foundation covered her final year of tuition and provided her with a laptop and the medical textbooks she needed. The day she graduated and called to thank us, tears streaming down her face as she spoke about her new job at Massachusetts General Hospital, I understood what my grandmother meant about discovering who I really was. For 6 months, I kept my new work largely secret from my family. I told them I was freelance consulting, which wasn't entirely untrue. I was learning to establish boundaries, something that felt foreign and uncomfortable at first. I stopped accepting every dinner invitation from my mother, stopped dropping everything when Marcus needed a favor, stopped participating in conversations where I was expected to be grateful for being included. The shift in dynamics was immediate and telling. My mother began calling more frequently, her voice carrying an edge of annoyance when I wasn't immediately available. Marcus started making pointed comments about my new attitude and suggesting that grief was making me antisocial. Only my father seemed to understand that something fundamental had changed, though he said nothing directly. The confrontation I had been dreading came in the form of a housewarming party. Marcus and his fiancée had finally moved into my grandmother's Beacon Hill house after months of renovations that had erased every trace of her careful decorating. The invitation came with a note from my mother. "It's time to celebrate as a family again. Elena, please don't make this difficult." I almost didn't go. The thought of walking through rooms where I had spent countless afternoons with my grandmother, now transformed into a showcase for Marcus's success, felt like attending my own execution. But I realized that avoiding the confrontation would only delay the inevitable. If I was truly going to change my life, I had to stop running from difficult conversations. The house was unrecognizable. Gone were my grandmother's antique furniture and family photographs, replaced by sleek modern pieces that could have come from any high-end showroom. The kitchen where Nana had taught me to make her famous tiramisu now featured granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that looked like they belonged in a restaurant. The library where we had spent hours reading together had been converted into a home gym. I moved through the party like a ghost, accepting condolences about my grandmother from people who had barely known her while watching my family bask in their newfound wealth. Marcus held court in the living room, regaling guests with stories about his renovation plans and his investment strategy. My mother played the role of proud matriarch, accepting compliments on her son's success as if she had personally orchestrated every triumph. It was when I overheard Marcus telling a group of his friends about poor Elena and her pathetic inheritance that something inside me snapped. He was laughing as he described the will reading, mimicking my shocked expression and suggesting that maybe I could frame the dollar bill as a consolation prize. The cruelty in his voice, the casual way he turned my pain into entertainment, was the final straw. I walked over to the mantelpiece and placed a framed photograph of my grandmother next to Marcus's Harvard Business School diploma. It was a picture I had taken of her in her garden the summer before she died, her hands covered in soil and her face radiant with joy. She looked alive and vibrant and completely herself. "She was an extraordinary woman," I said loudly enough for the room to hear. "She taught me that true wealth isn't about what you inherit, but what you build with your own hands." The room fell silent. Marcus's face flushed red with anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell which. My mother's smile became strained and dangerous. But I felt calmer than I had in months. I left the party without saying goodbye, knowing that I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The next day, my phone rang constantly. My mother demanded explanations. Marcus accused me of trying to ruin his celebration. Even my father called, his voice weary as he asked if we could have lunch to talk things through. But for the first time in my life, I didn't rush to smooth things over. I didn't apologize or explain or try to make everyone else comfortable with my choices. I simply continued building the life I wanted, one boundary at a time. It was 3 months later that Marcus discovered the foundation. I'm still not sure how he found out, whether it was through social media or mutual acquaintances or simple curiosity about my new financial independence. The confrontation came in the form of an unannounced visit to my office on a Tuesday morning in June. I was reviewing grant applications when my assistant buzzed in to say that my brother was in the lobby demanding to see me. He burst into my office like a man possessed, his usual polished exterior cracked and desperate. "Where did you get the money for all this?" he demanded, gesturing at my office with its view of Boston Harbor. "The real estate, the staff, the fancy furniture. You're unemployed, Elena. You can't afford this lifestyle on unemployment benefits." I had been preparing for this moment for months, but seeing him unraveled still caught me off guard. His face was flushed, his expensive suit wrinkled, his confidence replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "I think you should sit down," I said calmly. "Don't patronize me," he snapped. "I know you're hiding something. Did you take out loans using the family name? Are you running some kind of scam?" The accusation was so typical of him, so consistent with his view of me as incapable of independent success, that I almost laughed. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the Foundation's website. His face went white as he read about our mission, our funding, our board of directors, which included my name as founder and president. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Nana left you $1. $1. She left me much more than that," I said. "She left me a legacy that actually matters." I told him about the Swiss accounts, the years of planning, the foundation that had been operating in my name since before I even knew it existed. I watched his expression shift from disbelief to understanding to rage as the implications sank in. She had no right, he said, his voice rising. That money should have been mine. I'm the oldest. I'm the son. She had no right to give away what belonged to this family. She had every right to do whatever she wanted with her own money, I replied. And she chose to give it to someone who would use it to help others instead of buying another vacation home. The next few months were a nightmare of legal challenges and family warfare. Marcus hired an expensive law firm to contest my grandmother's will, claiming that she was mentally incompetent when she established the Swiss accounts. My mother supported him completely, calling me daily with accusations and demands that I do the right thing and share the inheritance. My father remained largely silent, though I sometimes caught him watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Henri flew in from Geneva to help coordinate our legal defense, bringing with him years of documentation proving my grandmother's mental clarity and careful planning. We had videos of her explaining her reasoning, written statements from her doctors, and detailed records of every transaction. The Swiss bank officials who had worked with her for years testified to her sharp mind and clear intentions. But the legal battle was taking a toll on me emotionally. I had known that discovering the truth about my inheritance would change my relationships with my family, but I hadn't been prepared for the level of vitriol they would direct at me. My mother stopped speaking to me entirely. Marcus launched a whisper campaign among our mutual friends, suggesting that I had somehow manipulated our grandmother or forged documents. The stress was affecting my sleep, my appetite, and my ability to focus on the foundation's work. It was during one particularly dark period that I met with a therapist named Dr. Sarah Chin, who specialized in family trauma and emotional abuse. At first, I resisted the idea that what I had experienced constituted abuse. After all, my parents had never hit me, and my family's dysfunction felt relatively mild compared to the stories I heard from some of the women the foundation helped. But Dr. Chin helped me understand that emotional neglect and systematic devaluation were forms of harm that left invisible scars. She helped me see that my lifelong pattern of minimizing my own needs and accepting crumbs of affection weren't character strengths, but survival mechanisms I had developed in response to an environment where love was conditional and scarce. You learn to make yourself small because taking up space felt dangerous, she explained during one of our sessions. But you're not that little girl anymore. You have resources and allies and the power to protect yourself. The legal battle finally ended 14 months after it began. The judge ruled decisively in my favor, stating that there was overwhelming evidence of my grandmother's competence and clear intention. Marcus was ordered to pay court costs and attorney fees, and my mother's attempts to claim emotional damages were dismissed entirely. But the real victory wasn't legal. It was the moment I realized I no longer needed their approval to feel worthy of love and respect. I had built something meaningful with my grandmother's gift, something that existed completely independently of my family's recognition or acceptance. The foundation had grown substantially during the legal proceedings. We had helped over 200 women start businesses, complete educational programs, or escape dangerous situations. We had established partnerships with organizations across the country and begun developing programs specifically for young women aging out of foster care. The work was challenging and sometimes heartbreaking, but it gave me a sense of purpose I had never experienced before. 6 months after the legal victory, my father called and asked if he could take me to dinner. We hadn't spoken privately since the lawsuit began, and I wasn't sure what to expect. He chose a small Italian restaurant in the North End, the kind of place my grandmother had loved for its authentic food and unpretentious atmosphere. We sat across from each other in a corner booth, and for the first time in my adult life, my father looked older than his years. His gray hair had thinned considerably, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and regret. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. Multiple apologies, actually. But I'm not sure where to start. I waited, having learned that silence was often more powerful than rushing to fill awkward spaces with reassurance. "I knew," he said finally. "About the Swiss accounts, about the foundation, about your grandmother's real plans. She told me everything before she died. The admission hit me like a physical blow. You knew? All this time, you knew what she had left me. She swore me to secrecy, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She said it was important that you discover your own strength before you discovered your financial security. She was afraid that if you knew about the money from the beginning, you might use it to try to buy your family's love instead of learning to value yourself. I stared at him across the table, trying to process this revelation. So you watched me suffer through that while reading. You watched Marcus humiliate me and Mom dismiss me, and you said nothing. I thought about intervening 1,000 times, he said. Every time I saw you hurting, every time I watched them treat you like you didn't matter, I wanted to tell you the truth. But your grandmother made me promise, and I owe her that much loyalty. You owed me loyalty too, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. I was your daughter long before I was her granddaughter. He nodded, tears gathering in his eyes. You're right. I failed you in ways I'm only beginning to understand. I let your mother's favoritism toward Marcus become my own silence, and I convinced myself that staying neutral was the same as being fair. But there's nothing fair about watching one child diminish another and doing nothing to stop it. We talked for 3 hours that night. He told me about his own childhood, about a critical father, and a mother who showed love through worry rather than encouragement. He explained how he had retreated into work and silence as a way of avoiding conflict, never realizing that his absence had left me vulnerable to treatment that no child should endure. Your grandmother saw what I was too cowardly to acknowledge, he said as we prepared to leave. She saw that you had been giving pieces of yourself away for so long that you had forgotten what you looked like whole. She wanted to give you the chance to find out. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Trust, once broken, requires time and consistent action to rebuild. But it was a beginning, the first honest conversation we had ever had about the dynamics that had shaped our family for decades. My relationship with Marcus and my mother never recovered. Marcus eventually moved to California with his wife, claiming that Boston held too many painful memories. My mother continued to blame me for the family's fractured state, unable to acknowledge her role in creating the favoritism that had driven us apart. I grieved these losses, but I also recognized them as necessary casualties of choosing authenticity over peace. 3 years after that terrible reading, I stood in the renovated brownstone that housed the Foundation's expanded Boston headquarters. We had just announced a partnership with Harvard Business School to provide entrepreneurship training for women transitioning out of poverty. The press conference had gone well, and I was reviewing the positive coverage when my assistant knocked on my door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." Her name is Maria Santos. Maria was a woman in her early 30s with prematurely gray hair and eyes that held the particular weariness of someone who had survived more than her share of hardship. She sat across from my desk, clutching a folder full of documents and photographs, her hands shaking slightly as she began to speak. "I heard about your foundation through a friend who received a business loan last year," she said. "I don't know if you can help me, but I'm running out of options." Her story was devastating and familiar. An abusive marriage that had lasted 12 years, 3 children who depended on her, and a recent escape that had left her financially destitute but finally free. She had been a nurse before her marriage, but her husband had forced her to quit working and had systematically destroyed her confidence and credit. Now she was living in a shelter and trying to find a way to rebuild her life from nothing. "I want to go back to school," she said, pulling out transcripts and recommendation letters from her file. "I want to become a nurse practitioner, maybe specialize in helping other women who've been through what I've been through. But I can't afford tuition, and I can't work full-time while I'm studying because I need to take care of my kids." As I listened to her speak, I thought about my grandmother's letter and her words about discovering who I really was. 3 years ago, I had been a woman who apologized for taking up space, who accepted scraps of affection and called it love, who had never imagined she could build something meaningful with her own hands. Now I was someone who could look at Maria's hopeful, frightened face and say with complete confidence, "We can help you." The conversation lasted 2 hours. By the end, We had outlined a comprehensive support plan that would cover her tuition, provide childcare assistance, and offer her a part-time position with the foundation that would give her both income and relevant experience. I watched her face transform as she realized that her dream wasn't impossible, that someone believed in her potential enough to invest in her future. After she left, I stood at the window of my office and looked out at the Boston skyline. The city looked different now than it had 3 years ago, not because it had changed, but because I had. I was no longer the woman who measured her worth by other people's approval or who believed that love required her to shrink herself into acceptable shapes. I thought about my grandmother, who had been brave enough to show me the truth about my family even though it meant causing me temporary pain. I thought about the Swiss accounts and the careful planning and the foundation that bore my name. But mostly I thought about the hundreds of women like Maria who had walked through our doors carrying their dreams and their determination, looking for someone to believe in their potential. That evening, I called Henri in Geneva to update him on our latest numbers. The foundation was thriving beyond anything my grandmother had imagined when she first established it. We had helped over 1,000 women in 3 years, with a success rate that exceeded industry standards. More importantly, we had created a model that other organizations were beginning to replicate. Isabella would be proud, Henri said as I finished my report. Not just of the numbers, but of who you've become. I think she knew who I was before I did, I replied. She just gave me the resources to figure it out for myself. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment overlooking the Charles River and reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 years ago, I had been a woman defined by what she lacked: my family's approval, professional recognition, financial security, a sense of my own worth. Now I was defined by what I had built: meaningful work, authentic relationships, a clear sense of purpose, and the unshakable knowledge that I deserved to take up space in the world. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick. There had been moments of devastating loneliness when I first started setting boundaries with my family. There had been nights when I questioned whether choosing authenticity over acceptance had been worth the cost. There had been legal battles and professional challenges and personal setbacks that made me wonder if I was strong enough to build the life I wanted. But there had also been moments of pure joy that I never could have imagined when I was trapped in the old patterns. The day Lorraine called to tell me her accounting practice had grown large enough to hire 2 employees. The afternoon Camille brought her newborn daughter to the office and told me she was naming her Isabella in honor of my grandmother. The morning I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about whether my family approved of my choices in over a month. I had learned that healing wasn't a destination, but a daily practice of choosing myself over the comfort of familiar dysfunction. I had discovered that my worth wasn't determined by other people's ability to recognize it, and that love offered with conditions wasn't actually love at all. Most importantly, I had found out who I was when I stopped trying to be who everyone else needed me to be. The dollar bill from my grandmother's will still sits framed on my desk, not as a reminder of rejection, but as a symbol of the moment my real life began. Next to it is a photograph of her in her garden, dirt under her fingernails and joy on her face, looking exactly like the woman who had the courage to save me from myself. Sometimes people ask me if I ever regret the choices I made, if I miss the family connections I sacrificed in pursuit of authenticity. The answer is complicated. I grieve the relationships I wish I could have had, the unconditional love I spent decades trying to earn, the family gatherings that might have been filled with genuine warmth instead of performed affection. But I don't regret choosing truth over comfort or self-respect over acceptance. The Elena who sat in that lawyer's office 3 years ago, devastated by the public confirmation of her invisible status, could never have imagined the woman I've become. She was so focused on earning crumbs that she couldn't see the feast that was waiting for her to claim it. She was so afraid of taking up space that she had forgotten how to stand at full height. Now, as I prepare for another day of work that feeds my soul instead of just paying my bills, I think about the letter my grandmother left me and her prediction that I would discover who I really was. She was right, but not in the way I expected. I didn't become someone new. I became someone I had always been but had been taught to hide. I became the woman who had been buried under years of accommodation and self-doubt, the one who had been waiting patiently for permission to exist. The foundation continues to grow, and with it, my understanding of what true wealth means. It's not about the numbers in my bank account or the square footage of my office or the recognition I receive for my work. It's about the moment when a woman like Maria realizes that her dreams are possible, that someone believes in her potential, that she doesn't have to settle for a life that feels too small for her spirit. Tomorrow, I'll meet with 3 new applicants, each carrying their own story of survival and hope. I'll listen to their dreams and help them create plans to achieve them. I'll remind them that they deserve support and encouragement, that their ambitions matter, that they don't have to apologize for wanting more than they've been given. And in doing so, I'll continue the work my grandmother started, not just helping women rebuild their lives, but teaching them the lesson that took me 26 years to learn. That we are all worthy of love that doesn't require us to disappear, success that doesn't diminish others, and happiness that comes from living as our authentic selves rather than the smaller versions the world sometimes demands. The inheritance my grandmother left me wasn't just money, though the financial resources made everything else possible. It was the gift of seeing myself clearly, perhaps for the first time. It was the courage to stop accepting less than I deserved and the wisdom to recognize that the people who truly love us want us to shine, not dim our light to make them more comfortable. As I turn off the lights in my office and head home to the life I've built with my own hands, I carry with me the knowledge that I am enough exactly as I am. Not because someone else has finally recognized my worth, but because I have learned to see it myself. And that recognition, hard-won and authentic, is the kind of inheritance that can never be taken away.